Hello, everyone. It's Mr. Barden here. Today, I'm just going to do a relatively quick video. It kind of came up uh, as just kind of a how do I do blank sort of thing with a request. So, we worked it out in the moment, but I was like, this could be an interesting little video topic. So I figured, why not show it out here? It should work relatively easy. I'm just kind of going offhand with this. So we're going to experiment and see what works. What this is, specifically asked, how could I make it so I spawn a new sprite every blank amount of time? And there's several different ways you can do this. I'm going to show you what I think is probably the easiest. Again, there's several different ways you could make timer functions and callbacks and asynchronous stuff. That's totally fine. I'm going to actually be tying the spawning of the sprites here to the frames of the game. I think that's just, if you need something real quick and easy, that's kind of the quickest and easiest. And I'll show you a few ways that you can kind of avoid some issues about that. So with all that being said, let's just hop right into it. If you enjoy the video, all that stuff, YouTube things, like, comment, subscribe, it definitely helps out the channel. Also, this has P5 Play, that coding library version 3 point whatever they're on now. It's version 3. If you're not using that, a lot of the syntax of what I'm typing out probably won't update or compare between the two, but the concepts will be the same. So let's just look at what we've got here. So this is just kind of my default starting code that I give to my students. And that is, it has P5 Play already loaded, and there's a sprite just put in the middle of the canvas. That's cool, but it just makes one sprite one time. We want to be able to make as many sprites as we want every so often. So there's a few steps that we can do to kind of break this down. I'm going to start with the first, which is probably the most useful bit of information in this video for anyone wanting to do something like this or similarly related. And that is, I'm going to create my sprite in a separate function. So I'm just going to show you exactly what I mean by that. I'm just going to hop right down to the bottom. Function more sprites. You can call it whatever you want, but it's just going to be a function that just makes more sprites. That's our goal. And this is where I'm going to put this command here to make a function. Just like that. You can make it global. You can make it local. For right now, I'm just going to leave all the defining as globally done. So I've got that right there, and now it's not going to make a sprite until we tell it to. So if I said more sprites, now it'll make a sprite. I could do it in a bunch of different ways. If I just copied this and did it like 4 times, they're all going to be identical. You can see that because of this P5 Play version's rules with collisions, they all kind of separate from each other, but they all spawn in at exactly the same location. So that's already very useful, because now whenever we want a single sprite, in this case, we can create this. I'm going to actually make this a little bit more useful in the fact that we're going to have it be able to make any number of sprites we want. And we're going to do that with a for loop. Right there. And the result is going to be to make this into a sprite. There we are. And we want this for loop to run for, let I start at 0. I is less than whatever value num is. And then I plus plus. So now the way that this for loop will go is whenever we call more sprites, we're going to give it a number. I call it num to make it clear we need a number. And this for loop we have here is going to run for however many times we tell it to, and each time it runs, it's going to make a new sprite. Now, this is where things can get a little more chaotic, depending on what you're wanting to do. And that is that in this function, and technically in this for loop, is where you're going to specify every single thing you want to have with your sprite. So for the sake of this, why not, we'll mix it up. I'm just going to say, we're just going to make a new sprite like that, and we'll say my sprite.x equals a random value between 100 and 300. The y property will be the same thing. And let's make these circles. Why not? My sprite dot d for diameter equals a random value. And let's put this one let's just say between 5 and 20. You run this, we get nothing, so I'll just call more sprites. And we will say specifically just give us 1. And we make 1 randomly placed and sized sprite every time. If I wanted to make 10, well, now there's 10. And they just, boom, pop, there you go. So that's great.
This is a reminder. Check the fish filter.
Thank you, Alexa. One second. Alexa, stop. I forgot I had that going. So after this video, I'll go check on the filter in my fish tank, make sure that doesn't need changing, and we'll go along from there. You got a little insight into my weekend schedule just now. Anyways, where I was at. We've got this function right here, very useful. This is where you, in this little for loop, this is where you would say, a bunch of other stuff. Maybe we want to say my sprite, if I can spell, sprite dot color equal, I think it's C for color. Hey, we want to give it a color, and I'm just going to make them, I don't know, green. So let's see. Barely any red, a lot of green, and maybe a little blue. I don't know. Okay, it's not C. There we go. And set it like so. I actually don't like that green. I want it to be a little bit darker. So what if I made this instead 100 and you like 40? Or something like that, a little bit darker. I'm not going to spend too much time on it. This is where you could also add animations and set other properties. Another thing you could do is make a group. You just make a sprite group here. Just make a new group. And then I always like to, at the very end, say, my group dot add my sprite. There's multiple ways you can add a sprite to a group. This is just the way I'm doing it for this video. But inside of this for loop, again, we're going to make a new sprite every time the for loop runs. And in order to pull that off and have all of the things update and be, working, you need to set all of the properties and characteristics of the sprite right here when you make it. If things are going to change and update later in your sketch, that's a different aspect. It's just whenever you make the sprite, give it all of its initial everything right at one spot. So again, adding all the animations, adjusting the various properties, this is where you're going to want to do that. So that's the first part right there. So we can just offhandedly, whenever we want, spawn more sprites. If I wanted to say, if mouse is pressed It helps when I remember my parentheses. There we go. And then, and only then, will we spawn 10 more sprites. That's cool. It works. It's kind of fun to watch it all kind of hectically spawn a million sprites and then try to process all of that. I'm going to stop it before the internet breaks. But we want it to automatically spawn a new. I'll just have to do a single new sprite this time, but as we've seen, it can be as many as you want with this setup, and have it spawn every so often. So there's, again, like I mentioned, several ways you can do this. I'm going to specifically show in this video how you can attach this automatic spawning to the frames of your game. So in order to do that, we're going to need to do a few things. We're going to need to monitor a certain value. So I'm just going to say let sprite check, and I'll call it that. And we're just going to make that. And heck, I'll even give it a default value of 0. So basically what we're going to do is after everything gets set up, sprite check, we are going to assign it to be frameCount. FrameCount is a system variable in P5 that just counts how many frames have passed since you press the play button here and start your sketch. It's just going to continually tick up every time there's a new frame. That's very useful because we can then monitor this and respond to it in different ways. The way that I am going to do this is by basically comparing the difference between the value of sprite check and frame count over time, because frame count is going to continually increase every time or every frame. Sprite check will only increase when we want it to. So just to illustrate that, I'm going to go back down here into my more sprites function right at the end of the for loop. We're going to go past it so that we're after the for loop, but still inside the function. And we will just say exactly what I typed on line 8. Sprite check, got to spell that right, equals frame count. There we are. Just like that right there. So this is going to manually set sprite check to equal the frame count after all of the sprites have been made, and then the function stops. Because we're only setting this once, we're going to set sprite check to a specific number, and then frame count is going to keep going up and up and up. And I'm actually going to just copy this conditional statement, and then we'll also let that comment it out, just because it's fun to play with that if mouse is pressed, spawn some more, but we don't need it right now. Instead, we're going to set up a different conditional. So we're going to check and see if frame count minus where'd it go? Sprite check is greater than a number. I'm going to specifically go ahead and say 30. So the way that this will work is if frame count is less, or we're going to subtract whatever that sprite check value from the frame count. If 30 or more frames have passed, we will then spawn a new sprite. We can play around with this, but I'm actually going to do one more thing before I show the example, and that is I'm going to manually hard throttle the frame rate to be 30 frames. So if we just go up here into setup and say frame rate 30, this will set the frame rate to be 30 frames a second. Normally, again, P5 will try to get the best frame rate it can. It kind of defaults to 60. I have a decent computer with a decent internet connection that's all hardwired through the Ethernet, so I very rarely have trouble getting, significantly. I can't even talk. I very rarely have less than 60 frames unless I'm doing a lot of computing. That may not be the case for you. So I like to manually set my frame rate when I'm doing something like this. That way I know that unless something is going wrong, I'm pretty much guaranteed this 30 frame rates with, 30 frame rate with small exceptions. So we've got that right there. And if we run this, we should see, just as it is, a new sprite spawning every second. Let's give it a test and see if I broke something. Hey, there we go. So in this case, we are spawning the same sprites like we did before. It is now just automatically doing it one time every second. And you can see them popping up on the screen right there. So that's cool. If you want to customize it, that's kind of where I'm going to end up this video, is customizing this just a little bit. And we'll play around with that as we go. So let's see here. If we could make another variable, let sprite rate equal a value. So let's say how many times, but basically if we just adjust this number, we can change it. And actually, I want to check a thing in the reference for frames. Count frame rate. I think we want is there another? So again, this is what frameCount is doing. I was wondering if there was a way to see just what the frame rate is to be displayed every second. Yeah, we'll attempt to refresh it 30 times. And if it, it can't do it, if it can't do it, but it'll pretty much guarantee that. For value, this is the same as get. Okay, so just calling frame rate with no arguments returns. That's what we wanted to do. Okay. So, boom. So what you can do here, we can say sprite rate. So let's say how often we want this to occur. At a rate of 1, it'll be 1 times every second. So we'll start with that from there. But now, if we just replace this 30, we can say, well, instead of that, we'll do frame count, not frame count, frame rate times sprite rate. And we should see that this down here will now update based off of whatever we tell it for the sprite rate. Something break. I thought I saw red down here, but I guess not. But again, same kind of thing. If I spawn this so that it's now happening twice a second, we should see that now when I hit refresh, the sprites are popping up twice as fast. No, I've got this backwards. So it's now spawning every 2 seconds. And if I did 0.5, it should now be twice as fast as before. There we go. Okay. Yeah, so I had that backwards. So this is the amount of time in seconds that we want it to delay in between it. So half a second, we've got it there. 0.25, it should now be twice as fast. Yeah. Whereas 0.5, or just at 5, would now be once every 5 seconds. Yes. So this is where I'm going to wrap it up. So the reason I'm going to wrap it up here is because at this point, you could now apply this to whatever you want. You can specify and customize very easily, the spawn, how many times per second this is going, or I should say the amount of seconds in between each spawn. You can change the frame rate and it'll automatically update this conditional right here, so it'll all work. So I could set this to be 60 frames or 3 frames or whatever you want to do, and all of this math will update. I could have it spawn different sprites. I could have the sprites be at the same location. I could change other properties. I could have it do whatever I want. It could call a completely different function and do something else completely different. Maybe instead I want to have, something change on the background, or, locations spawn, or I don't know, it could be whatever you want. I'm, not really planning out ideas right now with this, but it will automatically change and update everything there. This does become a little problematic if, again, looking at frame rate, where did that line go? If the processor is not fast enough to maintain the frame rate, it will not be achieved. Again, and by default, it tries to go for 60, but 24 should be fine for most of your animations. That's fine. But if your computer and your internet connection cannot keep up with your desired frame rate, this is going to work a little bit iffy, because it can't maintain the rate that it needs, that you've told it to do. This can be fixed a few different ways by either lowering the frame rate or lowering the processing demands on your program. I'll kind of let you decide what may or may not work better for you. There's other ways that we can go about achieving this as well, whether we're actually counting and maintaining time in milliseconds, creating these little asynchronous functions and things like that. If this, was interesting to people watching it and you want to see me do that, put that down in the comments below and I'll come back with, again, more ways you can plan stuff out to happen in the future with different things like that and callbacks and all that sort of stuff. If you enjoyed the video, you learned something, definitely like, comment, subscribe, all the YouTube stuff. You know how it goes. And stay tuned for more. I'll be posting some more stuff and channel updates in some upcoming videos that should be coming out probably the day after this one does, just because of, I'm recording and posting this on April Fool's Day. If you can kind of see with my new camera circle, which I need to tweak a little bit, you can now actually see when this is getting filmed in the bottom corner. So I'm not going to post a bunch of channel updates on April Fools because no one will take them seriously. So coming out early April, you'll see a bunch of channel updates and things like that. So this is where I'm going to end it. I feel like I've said that 3 or 4 times now, and I will see you all the next time that I see you. Bye.